This podcast may contain certain forward-looking statements concerning Tri-State's plans, performance, and strategies. Actual results may differ materially because of numerous factors, and Tri-State undertakes no obligation to update these forward-looking statements. We urge you to review Tri-State's filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission for a discussion of these factors.
I think the most important tool that we have is our people. It's the men and women on the ground. It's the communities that live there. They know historical wildfire. They know what assets they got. They know what the values at risk are. So that's the tool, and that tool's never going to go away. I'm a big believer in technology. The human component, I don't think, could ever be removed from the equation.
Welcome to Western Wise, the podcast where Tri-State and our cooperative members explore what it takes to power the West. From reliability to wildfire mitigation, we dive into the energy issues that matter most to rural, agricultural, and mountain communities across Colorado, Nebraska, New Mexico, and Wyoming.
Well, thanks first of all, for having me. I am the Wildfire Mitigation Program Manager.
Thanks for being here. All right, we'll start with just some basic background on you. Where are you from?
I grew up in a rural part of southern New Jersey, not far from the Delaware Bay.
How did you get here? Or when did you get here?
How did I get here? Like many good stories, there's a girl involved. After graduating from college, after working a little bit here and there, I entered the Peace Corps. And as I was flying to our Peace Corps location, which was Nepal, I wound up sitting next to this beautiful blue-eyed gal named Amy from Ohio. One thing led to another. We're a couple. 3 years later, we've got to leave the country. Where do we go? Well, let's go to Colorado because she got into grad school and I was just tagging along at that point.
And you've been here since then?
Over 20 years now.
Wow, that's great. Where did you go to school?
I went to school, my undergrad, from a little liberal arts college in western Pennsylvania called Juniata College. Just about 1,200 students there. Beautiful setting out in the coal country of western Pennsylvania. And I studied forest ecology there and also had the opportunity to study abroad while I was there too. So a little bit of time in Ecuador at that point. And then I did my master's degree several years later in Colorado, once I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, from the University of Colorado at Denver, where I got a master's in environmental science and water quality.
So are you in Denver or where do you live exactly?
We currently live in Lyons, but I've lived in Denver, I've lived in Durango, lived in Berthoud, and Lyons is the best of all, in my opinion.
Sounds great. Well, Julia is our expert treasure hunter, so I think she found some good additional questions about you.
Oh, yeah. I perused your resume. You were a ship rigger.
That's right.
What is that?
Well, it goes back to my roots in rural South Jersey, being so close to the bay, the ocean. We're water people, even though I'm a pasty redhead.
Well, you're in the wrong spot if you're a water person.
This is true. And it's pretty sunny for a redhead like myself. But having that affinity towards the ocean easily lend itself to getting on the boats and fishing and crabbing with friends. My father was in the Marine Police. When I was in college, I helped to restore a 1928 Delaware Bay oyster schooner, about 120 feet from stem to stern. And as a tall ship, it's actually the official tall ship of New Jersey. So it's all that tall ship stuff, the big masts and huge hawsers and heavy sails. And so I got an appreciation for sailing and rigging and working those kinds of systems on old wooden boats. And after I graduated college from in that school in Pennsylvania, floundered for a little bit, made my way to Martha's Vineyard where my brother was living and needed a job. And didn't want to be a plumber, didn't want to be an electrician, wasn't quite ready to use my degree. So I found some work in the maritime industry and started working for the Martha's Vineyard shipyard. And there I would rig sailboats. And in the winter, we would take all the rigging off and the masts off and then bring them on shore and store them. And in the summer, we'd put them all back in towboats and take sailing trips and voyages and all that kind of fun stuff.
I watched a documentary once about a rural coal country town, and what really surprised me was that the forests there are gorgeous and old, and it almost feels European, how just kind of ethereal they are.
Yeah, the beautiful mixed deciduous forests of that part of the country are really fantastic, because there is still some old growth there, which is pretty rare, especially on the east coast of the United States, because so much of it was removed and turned into housing and ships and and industry back when, the reals of our country were getting going and they were building our society. So to find those passive old growth were really special. Got to study in a lot of old growth beech forest. Got to do some research in rhododendron forest. And yeah, it's always felt home for me. So I've always enjoyed it.
Is that kind of what sparked your interest in going to school for forestry?
It was. Plus, my middle name is Forrest. No lie, 2 R's. But I always felt at home in the woods. Being a young kid running around at the end of my street was a forest. Just I don't know who owned it, private, state, whatever. We rode our BMX bikes all over that place, and that's where I would go every day after school with my golden retriever and go walk him and run with him. And I'm sure that's lent me part of the reason why I'm here today.
Sounds like a storybook.
Me and my golden retriever
Yeah.
in the forest. Yeah, maybe.
Also, sounds like you were contractually obligated to go into forest stuff. So,
Well, I was definitely obligated to get out of my house because my mom was a single mom and she needed me and my brother out of the building on occasion.
I want to hear a little bit more about the Peace Corps. It seems like you've got a desire to give back. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mentioned in my undergraduate degree, I got an opportunity to study abroad in Ecuador, and my college degree is in forest ecology. And when I went to Ecuador, I was studying tropical forest ecology, and of course, they have a portion of the Amazon basin there. And when I was first getting orientated to the program in Ecuador, getting to know my host family, getting to know the university in Quito, I learned that the university had a field station deep in the jungle on the other side of the Andes. And we got to visit that field station, and it just blew my mind as a kid who was interested in the woods, because it was, all the things you think about in the National Geographic book of jungles. It was pink river dolphins, it was piranha, it was 11 species of primate, 300 species of birds, huge ceiba trees, saw jaguar, all these things. And I thought, wow, how do I get back there? Well, in studying, during the course of my studies, I came to befriend the director of the field station, who was one of my professors. I expressed my interest with him to engage more with the research field station, and he suggested an internship. So I wound up cutting my studies short in Ecuador. I finished that first semester. The plan was to do 2 semesters. I finished that first one, took a leave of absence from school, and then went and did an internship at the field station where I lived in the buildings with the local guides and the builders and Ecuadorians and tribal folks. And so I learned Spanish, and I really liked it. I really, really enjoyed it. So I started thinking later as I got back stateside, well, how can I, further that experience, both on a personal level of learning the cultures and the people and the new experiences, but also, what I learned educationally and, ideally professionally at some point about forests and management of those kinds of forests, and what can I learn from a completely different experience. And all those thoughts culminated with a recruiter from the Peace Corps that came to my college during my senior year, and the light bulb kind of went on. I was like, oh, this is how I could do it. And the path to Peace Corps back then, this was, 1998, 1999, when I was initially applying, was fairly lengthy. It took about 3-4 months to go through, but that's ultimately what launched my application into the Peace Corps, which got me in. How it worked for me in the Peace Corps was I gave them all the skills and abilities I had, which, to be honest, were not that many. I was a young kid who had never really practiced forestry, but I had a degree and I had some drive and I had a little bit of knowledge and I had availability, and I presented those to the Peace Corps, and they sent me a letter and they said, okay, Curtis, let's go to Nepal in February. And I said, that's great. Let's go to Nepal in February. I had no idea where I'd be sent. I figured they'd send me to the Latin American country because I could speak Spanish. Turns out it was more of a function of my skills and the time frame and what was open. So they enrolled me in a community forestry program there. So after about 3 months of training, I was equipped with a little bit of language, a little bit of technical knowledge, and I kid you not, a huge briefcase of medical supplies.
For when you get bit by something?
Bit by something, ingest something, fall on something. There were medications in there that probably should not just be handed to people, but we had a lot of training that goes along with them too.
What's the forest like in Nepal?
The forest in Nepal is pretty diverse. If you think of Nepal, most people think of the Himalaya, and that's only about 1/3 of the country. But when you think about how steep those mountains rise, it's very similar to the Front Range here of the Rockies. Our Rockies have a little bit of foothills, and then they grow up pretty darn quick. In Nepal, there's like no foothills, man. It just goes straight uphill. And so you've got these extreme relief in topography. And the way I can best illustrate that is where I lived at my first posting in Nepal was down in the river bottom, and it was subtropical. We were growing mangoes. It was hot. It was humid, and it was a very tropical, subtropical environment. Well, every now and then I'd need to go up to the big city, right? The town, as it were, a large village in reality. And that was about 2,000 feet up the mountain. And as you'd walk up that mountain, you'd start moving through these different biotypes, and you'd start getting into subtropical, into temperate, and then, these different kinds of ecological zones. Okay, this one is suitable for growing rice, and this one's suitable for growing wheat. And you'd literally see that transition because it's pretty steep as you hiked up the hill all the way to the top, where was subalpine and ultimately alpine above tree line. So many different forest types there. They have rhododendron forests that are they're like 30 feet tall, these trees, with blooms that are the size of pie plates.
It must smell really nice, right?
It does. It does. Until you got around the water buffalo, and then it didn't smell as nice. But
which one did you like more? Did you like the forests of Ecuador or Nepal better?
I have to say, from a biological point of view, an ecological point of view, I don't think the Amazon can be beat in terms of the diversity of species there, the quantity of life there, the variety of, even in such a small area, the kinds of environments you can have were pretty extreme. So I thought that, and it was so foreign for me to be amongst that kind of species and those kinds of environments, that for me stood out more in an impression of the forest itself.
And so from Tri-State's perspective, we have high voltage transmission lines across such diverse terrain. It feels like we can either, one, be at risk from fire, or two, be the risk of a fire. How does Tri-State look at both of those risks, and how do we approach all of that?
And Tri-State's primary focus, not exclusive, but primary focus, is to prevent that accidental ignition. Let's make sure that spark doesn't occur, that arc fault doesn't occur, and that we prevent that accidental ignition from even happening in the first place. So that's really where we place the bulk of our efforts.
What's something you wish more people understood about the level of effort electric utilities have to put into wildfire mitigation overall?
Well, specific to Tri-State, I'd like people to appreciate how diverse our territory is and how many different ecosystems and landscape types in which we work. We've got over 200,000 miles of service territory. That's about 6,000 miles of high voltage transmission line running from Wyoming down in New Mexico and through Nebraska, Colorado. So if you think about that, there's sagebrush, there's shortgrass prairie, there's tallgrass prairie, there's mixed conifer forest, there's subalpine fir, there's just an extreme variety of landscapes that all have their own wildfire risk. So Tri-State has to develop a mitigation plan that can address all these different kinds of risks, because the risk is not spread equally throughout our service territory, nor any utility service territory. So the challenging part is identifying what those areas are, calculating what risks they have, and then applying the appropriate mitigation to those specific areas.
Okay, so kind of explain the process you go through to figure out those danger zones like M5.
Yeah. So what we do is we gather some maps. And these maps will tell us what the landscape looks like, what's the terrain. We'll gather maps that say, what's the fuel type, what kind of trees or grass or shrubs or whatever's there. What kind of weather maps do we have? And what do we know about historical fire occurrence? We gather those maps, and we kind of layer them on top of each other. And we get an idea of what wildfire risk is from a purely landscape level without kind of human intervention. From that, we layer over our assets, our transmission lines, our substations, our communications.
So we get to use some pretty interesting tools for the process of vegetation management. Can you tell me a little bit about the different tools that are used?
I think the most important tool that we have, and this is not tongue-in-cheek, it's our people. It's the men and women on the ground. It's the communities that live there, because they know their communities. They know historical wildfire. They know what assets they got. They know what the values at risk are. And so I think from that point, me engaging with our linemen and women on what they're doing and what they perceive as risk is really, really important for us to understand. So that's the tool, and that tool is never going to go away. I'm a big believer in technology. The human component, I don't think, could ever be removed from the equation, and that's not just job security. That's true belief there. Other tools we've got some pretty impressive. We've got a couple of masticators out there, which are big excavator type pieces of equipment that run on tracks or maybe rubber tires that are huge lawnmowers. These are the big, massive size excavators that you'd see on large construction sites that have been engineered in a way that they can till the ground in a way and just chew up everything in their path. So they eliminate and really reduce the amount of fuels by rearranging those fuels and taking them out of the danger zone and putting them in a position where they're less prone to wildfire. So that's a really cool tool that we have. Some of the other cool tools we have relate to situational awareness. We've got a drone program here at Tri-State, and we're starting to develop ways in which we can use those drones to relieve some of the stress from our linemen and women to have to climb a pole and really understand that asset. We can send the drone up. We can take a number of pictures. We can put thermal cameras on those drones. A lot of that stuff is still things that we're developing and still engaging and looking to incorporate into our programs. But that's another situational awareness tool that we have there too. And a lot of GIS tools. I mean, it's not the shiny, huge, heavy machinery that really gets people going. But the GIS tools and the team that we have here at Tri-State, their ability to consistently monitor weather conditions and understand changing conditions and in real time help us understand what that risk is and how it's changing are pretty useful tools as well for us. And right now, Tri-State is currently redeveloping our own wildfire mitigation plan. So we've had a plan since 2020. And think of it as our toolbox. It lists all the things that we can do to help mitigate wildfire risk. And that's, maintaining proper vegetation clearance, that's being situationally aware and knowing what the true wildfire risk is, hardening our system. How do we support each other? Knowing that we're a transmission organization and their distribution, so our equipment and our functions are inherently different. So how we mitigate is going to be different from how they mitigate. But I do think there's areas in which we can share information and help each other understand what we're doing. Tri-State is a part of a larger network of utilities, some of which are members and some of which are not in Colorado, that meet monthly. And we talk about wildfire risk. We talk about what we're each doing about it. There's a couple of transmission folks in there. Most of them are distribution. So I think one of the best things we can do is just get together and talk. Hey, what are you doing? What's effective? How did you pay for that? Is that working? How'd your members feel about that? It's really difficult to forecast when a 100-mile-an-hour wind may occur without NASA level forecasting. And utilities in California have built huge teams of people to do that kind of forecasting. And still it's a challenge. So I think understanding kind of on the day-to-day, we can do that mapping exercise that we talked about and understand things. We can prepare, we can harden. But how do we know and when do we know when that 100-mile-an-hour wind might come? And will that cause a problem for our equipment? Will that cause a tree to fall into our line? Where exactly might that occur out of the millions of trees that are out there is a really challenging piece of this work.
And Tri-State has a lot of ground to cover too, because we have like 6,000 miles of line. So with identifying places to watch out for, how do you pick where you're prioritizing?
Well, you got to start with the information you have, right? And the information you can forecast. You can't just throw your hands up. At least that's not my approach. So we take many bites at the apple, let's say it that way. We start with that landscape level modeling of wildfire risk and we overlay our assets. And from there, we're able to rank our transmission line and say, well, this one's got a higher wildfire risk for these reasons. And so from that, we tailor our management activities, our mitigation activities to then address those highest priorities first. And so we can proactively manage the vegetation within those high wildfire risk lines and go out and use that masticator and other tools to mitigate that risk. But the other way we do it, getting back to the weather, is keep our eye on changing weather conditions. And right now we're using red flag warnings and red flag watches that are put forth by the National Weather Service that feed into our operational systems. And at that point, our systems operators can make adjustments on recloser settings on our lines that can help mitigate a wildfire risk should an accidental ignition or an arc fault occur on our system some way. And we're developing some more sophisticated tools involving satellite imagery to help us identify what those problem vegetation pieces are and help mitigate those too. So it's really very specific of what the risk is and trying to combat that risk, but you never know when that is going to happen.
That's good questions. So it seems like it requires a lot of coordination, your work and different departments across Tri-State and organizations outside of Tri-State. But thinking about the other departments you work with here, I think you named some, but can you give me a sense of the variety?
Yeah, great question, Elizabeth, because Tri-State's had a wildfire program since they established the role that I have now, and it's been about 1.5 years since this role was formalized. But we've been doing wildfire mitigation for 15 years. So it's been transmission maintenance really leading that charge early on with a lot of the vegetation work and clearing those lines and preventing that accidental ignition from vegetation encroachment or strike tree or something like that. But from those early days, man, I can't think of an institution in Tri-State that I haven't worked with on this effort. I mean, sitting down and talking with folks like you in communications and getting the word out on what we're doing, and generating awareness around the risk and helping others to prepare for that is something I think that's relatively new. Working more and more with operations to dial in our systems controls and how do we isolate faults to the extent that we're able or sense those faults, and looking to new technologies and researches to help us advance on that front. Working with external affairs on policy at the state and federal level. But here we are. So really, it spans the gamut. And I'm really pleased to say that there's a real heightened awareness in Tri-State about wildfire risk. And it's never been difficult for me to engage in staff on the issue and have those conversations and talk more about what we're doing and where can we go with our work to level it up.
Are there any specific wins in the time that you've been in this role, either a relationship you've built or a discovery you've made with another group that's helped move this program forward?
There is a win. For me, being new to Tri-State, it struck me as seismic, and maybe that's an overstatement. But soon after I got here, we started, going in depth and talking to different departments about the work that they were doing. And one of the organizations in our company that I started to talk with very early and frequently with was operations, and understanding what their fire response plans are and what our state of readiness is. And I said one of them is to consider moving to a year-round fire safety setting posture. And Tri-State has done that. And I'm very, very proud that we've made that. And for me, maybe I'm overplaying it. That just seemed to be a pretty big shift for an organization like ours, because there's a lot that goes on to it, because those fire safety settings do have consequences with terms of reliability, which is one of our key functions. Sure. But so I've recently started volunteering with my local fire department in Lyons Fire Protection District. And we have a very heightened awareness, especially when these high winds come. And it really, I think, is a change in how even fire departments have become to acknowledge that the fire season is consistent. The three tenets of fire behavior are temperature, fuels, and topography. And we've been proven that we can have a cold day and still meet some of those other requirements for having a bad event.
So you mentioned it before in just kind of the vegetation that Tri-State has, but are there a lot of fire fuels just with the nature of being rural and having wildlands and forests and those kind of systems?
The more that we talk along those lines, really we talk with respect to what's called the WUI, the wildland urban interface. And this is something we've seen along with the shift in climate, we've seen a significant shift in human population moving into these wildfire-prone areas. So where I live is the WUI. It's a loose definition. I don't know if there is a proper industry definition for the WUI, but it's where humans are living in these ecosystems that had fire as part of their natural ecology.
What are your hopes, or what do you see? What are you optimistic about in the future?
My hopes, it's challenging sometimes to be hopeful. It really is.
And that was the incorrect answer.
I said it's challenging. But what's life without a good challenge, right? But I see hope in that there's more conversations around this now that there ever have been. And that's because the problem's larger than it is, right? It's not just because everybody's kind of woke up to it. It's been thrust in people's faces. And now we have to answer the call. And so that's what gives me optimism. Folks like this. I mean, this ability to have a voice that hopefully is spread to help someone gain a little bit more awareness. Our ability to have the kinds of conversations we have with smaller utilities that aren't as advanced as Tri-State and have the focus that we do. They're getting on board with these activities, whereas before it was kind of like, it's not really a problem. How big of it could it possibly be? It's hard to find someone who's sharing that same viewpoint these days. So while the problem's gotten bigger, the awareness and people's desire to do something about it has gotten bigger.
So Tri-State is in this business of electricity. But why do we operate to minimize the potential of wildfire? What is the personal risk? Where do we all live? I mean, is this our neighbors we're protecting? How do we approach this as far as why do we do what we do?
Well, first and foremost, what comes to my mind is we have a moral obligation. So I think we've got to understand, first and foremost, we work in an industry that's got a moral obligation to protect the environment and the people around it. The second, maybe even equal obligation we have is to protect the people who work for us and the communities that we serve, right? The men and women that service our lines and substations and you folks and, they all live in the communities and the co-ops that we serve. So by us protecting and doing wildfire mitigation, we're protecting the communities of our people and the communities in which they live and their livelihoods and the things they cherish. And I think that's incredibly important. We also protect the national interest. I mean, we are in an interconnected grid here. Add to that, we move through public land. We move a lot of our transmission lines through national forests, BLM. These are items of the public trust, and we want to protect those just as best as we can.
That's great. So it sounds like you stay up to date. You stay up to date on a lot of information going on in the industry. One of our questions about what you're reading right now. Are you a big reader? Do you turn to books or audiobooks, or dare I ask, podcasts to get information?
Spoiler alert, he doesn't listen to podcasts at all.
I have never actively downloaded to listen to a podcast. So hopefully I'm doing the right thing here.
That's pretty great.
And hopefully someone will show me how to find this later on after it's published. I do read. I don't, much to my family's enjoyment, because they love ribbing me on this, I don't read a lot of books. Let's say I don't read a lot of books quickly. I read books very slowly. I'm an early riser, pretty early riser guy. Used to be like bed fairly early, and I go to fall asleep in a second. So not a whole lot of time for me to read like before bed. So I do read news articles. I got a Kindle last year for Christmas. I made it through about 3 books, and I enjoy it. It's not a problem for me. It's just not something that occupies a bunch of my time. I do enjoy solace. I enjoy quiet. Living in Lyons, and I'm grateful to have a lot of open space near me. So if I get a break in the middle of the day, I go out for a walk, and it's just me and whatever's going on around side of me. Sometimes I'll put my headphones on, but usually not. So unfortunately, no, I'm not much of a bibliophile there. But
What was the last book you read last year?
Last book I read last year. Thanks, Julia.
I don't believe you can read anymore.
I remember it was a good book. It was a book on whitewater rafting. That's what I read last year. It was The Emerald Mile. There's a book. I'm a whitewater rafter. I'm a boater. And there's a book called The Emerald Mile, which documented a voyage that a whitewater rafter took down the Grand Canyon on an extreme hydrologic event that was really unprecedented after the creation of the Hoover and Glen Canyon dams. And he raced his dory down the Grand Canyon with a couple companions through whitewater that would scare the living crap out of anybody who saw it. But they did it to set a record to go from Lee's Ferry to the start down to the mouth of the canyon. And they did it. And it was a great book.
You're in Lions. You're part of the golf carting community. Are you also coaching basketball there?
Yeah. I coach. I help out with my daughter's team. She's in 7th grade right now. So that's the Lions senior, middle senior high school. We're a small community, so our middle senior schools combined, it's one building. So I've been assisting there. We've got a game tonight, so looking forward to continue our winning streak throughout the season. I coach them, and tonight's actually my son's 5th grade team's first practice. So we'll kick off his season. So from this, I'll go home, coach a couple of games, and go to practice. So it'll be a very basketball evening for me.
Less time to read.
Yeah, that's it. I don't have any time for reading. Coaching to do. Yeah.
What is your daughter's team name? Are they the Lionettes or something cute? Or
No, they go by the high school mascot, which I kid you not, are the Lions.
Ah.
So it's a lot of go Lions. Yeah, it's
like,
truth.
Eventually becomes a tongue twister, right?
Right. Now my son, he gets to choose his team name because he's not in that program. We're in a recreation league here. So I pressed him last night. I was like, you got to think of a team name. I can't remember where we were last year. We might have been the Fighting Five or something to that effect.
How about the Masticators?
The Masticators. I like that.
We had it mistaken as Mastodon on the list,
saw
so that's
that.
in the running too, if you want.
Oh,
Mastodons would be good too.
That would be such a good name for the Masticator, though. We should just nickname it the Mastodon.
I love it. Get some flames painted. No, get some tusks painted on it.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
We're getting prehistoric.
I'm sure the boys would be fine with that.
Yeah.
I guarantee they'd be fine with that.
You've experienced 2 fires now. What is some advice you have for a homeowner to be prepared?
I would encourage, from a fire safety standpoint, for everyone to have a go bag. Have a bag which has got some cash or a card, whatever you use these days. Got your medications, some copy of something that's really, really important that you can't live without, maybe some ID. And if you are going to evacuate, know what your evacuation route is going to be. Where are you going to go? Which direction are you going to go, or what directions are available for you to go? So don't wait for that moment to come, because that's going to be a terrible, terrible moment if you're not prepared.
Thanks for tuning in to Western Watts. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or on our website at tristate.coop/WWPod. We'll catch you next time.